It started with a sound, a single, low thud, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. In the quiet village of Nyamane, where the nights were often filled with the chatter of crickets and the occasional howl of a distant hyena, the sound stood out like a warning. At first, it was faint, almost dismissible, but it grew louder with each passing night. The elder said it came from Mansa Hill, the ancient mound that loomed over the village. Mansa Hill had always been a place of mystery. Even as children, we were told never to climb it or disturb its stillness. That hill is where the spirits of the old ones dwell, my grandmother had said, her voice hushed as though the spirits themselves might overhear. They are not unkind, but they do not tolerate disrespect. We had nodded dutifully, too. Afraid to ask further questions. It was the third night of the drumming when my friend Adisa came to my hut. He burst through the door without knocking, his face slick with sweat and his eyes wide with fear. "Kofi, have you heard it?" he whispered, his voice shaking. I nodded. "The drumming, of course. It's been keeping everyone awake." Adisa leaned in closer, his voice barely audible now. "It's not just drumming. It's calling someone." I frowned. "Calling who?" Adisa hesitated, then said, "I think it's calling me." I stared at him, unsure if he was joking or if the restless nights had finally gotten to him. Adisa wasn't the kind of person to make wild claims. He was the quiet one among us, always observing but rarely speaking unless necessary. "What do you mean?" I asked cautiously. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket, a small, polished stone etched with strange markings. "I found this outside my hut this morning," he said. "I don't know how it got there, but when I touched it, I heard the drumming more clearly. It's like it's inside my head now." I felt a chill run down my spine. "You have to tell the elders," I said. Adisa shook his head vehemently. "No, they'll think I've gone mad. Or worse, they'll say I've angered the spirits." I couldn't argue with that. The elders of Nyamane were wise, but they were also strict in their beliefs. Anything that even hinted at disrespecting the spirits was met with stern punishment. "Then what do you want to do?" I asked. Adisa's eyes darted toward the window, as though he feared someone might be listening. "I want to go to Mansa Hill," he said. "Tonight? Are you mad?" I hissed. "You know what they say about that place. No one goes there after dark." He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "I can't ignore this, Kofi. I'll go alone if I have to." I wanted to refuse. Every instinct told me to stay in the safety of my hut, to let Adisa deal with whatever was happening on his own. But he was my friend, and I couldn't let him face the unknown alone. "Fine," I said reluctantly, "but if we die, I'm haunting you in the afterlife." He managed a weak smile. Deal. That night, we left the village under the cover of darkness. The air was thick and heavy, the kind that made every sound seem louder than it was. The path to Mansa Hill was overgrown, the tall grasses brushing against our legs as we walked. Adisa held a lantern, its flickering light casting eerie shadows on the ground. The drumming grew louder as we approached the hill. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a rhythm, a pulse that seemed to sync with our own heartbeats. When we reached the base of the hill, Adisa stopped and looked up. "Do you hear that?" he asked. I nodded. The drumming was clearer now, almost hypnotic. It was coming from the top of the hill. We climbed in silence, the path steep and uneven. As we neared the summit, the drumming stopped abruptly. The sudden silence was almost deafening, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. At the top, we found a clearing. In the center was a large, flat stone, and on it sat a drum unlike any I'd ever seen. It was carved from dark wood and adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. Surrounding it were more of the polished stones, like the one Adisa had found. Adisa stepped forward, drawn to the drum as though by an invisible force. He reached out to touch it, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait," I said. "We don't know what will happen." Before he could respond, a voice echoed around us. It was deep and resonant, speaking in a language I didn't understand. Adisa, however, seemed to comprehend it. He knelt by the drum, his hands trembling. "What is it saying?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Adisa looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and fear. "It's the spirit of the hill. It's been waiting for someone to play the drum." It says the village is in danger. I felt a cold knot of fear in my stomach. Danger from what? A great darkness, Adisa said. But if I play the drum, it can be stopped. And if you don't, Adisa didn't answer. Instead, he picked up the drumsticks that lay beside the drum and began to play. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard, deep and resonant, as though the earth itself was responding to the rhythm. The patterns on the drum began to glow brighter, and the air around us seemed to hum with energy. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the clearing. It was tall and cloaked in shadows, its eyes glowing like embers. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. The figure spoke, its voice echoing like thunder. You have answered the call, child of Nyamane. The spirits will remember your courage. As Adisa continued to play, the figure raised its arms, and a wave of light erupted from the drum, spreading across the hill and beyond. The air grew still, and the figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. When Adisa finally stopped playing, he collapsed to the ground, exhausted but unharmed. The drum's glow faded, and the drumming in the night ceased for good. The next morning, the village awoke to a strange stillness. The usual chatter and activity was subdued, as though everyone had felt the same unspoken presence in the night. When Adisa and I returned, we found the elders waiting for us. They didn't scold us or ask questions. Instead, they nodded knowingly, their eyes filled with a quiet respect. The drumming never returned, but neither did the sense of unease. Life in Nyamane went on, but Adisa and I knew the truth. The spirits of Mansa Hill had been watching, and they had chosen to act through him. To this day, whenever I hear the distant sound of a drum, I can't help but wonder if it's calling someone else. In the heart of Nyamane, a small village surrounded by vast savanna and rolling hills, life unfolded at its own rhythm. The mornings were filled with the laughter of children chasing goats and women balancing clay pots on their heads as they walked to the communal well. The air always carried a faint scent of wildflowers mixed with the smokiness of cooking fires. Yet, beneath the village's ordinary routines lay a tale that no one dared to tell too often, the legend of the mystic well. The well stood on the far edge of Nyamane, flanked by tall acacia trees. It was said to be older than the village itself, its water clearer than any river and colder than any mountain stream. No one knew who had built it, but everyone knew its rules. Only those with pure intentions could fetch water from the mystic well, and even then, only at dawn. Breaking the rules was said to bring misfortune. I was a boy when it happened, the incident that changed everything. My name is Otieno, and I'm now one of the village elders. But back then, I was just a curious 13-year-old who spent his days herding cattle and listening to the stories of the old man who sat beneath the baobab tree. I'd always thought the tales about the mystic well were just that, stories. Until the day Wekesa decided to break the rules. Wekesa was not like the other young men in the village. He was bold and reckless, always pushing boundaries. The elders often shook their heads at him, warning him to respect the traditions. But Wekesa would laugh and wave them off. Why should we fear a well? He would say. It's just water. One evening, as we sat around the fire, Wekesa announced his plan. I'm going to fetch water from the mystic well tonight, he said, his voice steady but defiant. The others gasped, some even laughed nervously, thinking it was one of his jokes. But I knew Wekesa meant it. You can't, I said. The spirits guard the well. They will punish you, he smirked. Spirits? Otieno, you've been listening to too many stories. Tomorrow, you'll see that nothing happens. I didn't sleep that night. As the village fell silent, I watched from my window as Wekesa walked toward the well, a clay pot balanced on his shoulder. The moonlight bathed the path in an eerie glow, and the acacia trees swayed as if whispering warnings. I wanted to call out, to stop him, but fear held my tongue. The next morning, the village awoke to chaos. Wekesa had returned, but he was not the same. He sat in the middle of the village square, trembling, his clay pot shattered beside him. His eyes were wide with terror, and he muttered incoherently. The elders rushed to his side, trying to make sense of his ramblings. The water ... He whispered, the water is alive. No one could get more out of him that day. He refused to eat or drink, and by evening, he had fallen into a deep sleep. But the village was uneasy. That night, strange things began to happen. The cattle refused to enter their pens, the chickens clucked nervously, and the air grew thick and heavy, as if a storm was brewing. The next morning, the elders held a meeting beneath the baobab tree. They decided that a sacrifice must be made to appease the spirits of the well. But what did Wekesa do? I asked, my voice trembling. Elder Nyamane, the oldest and wisest among us, looked at me with solemn eyes. He fetched water with pride. Not need, the spirits do not tolerate arrogance. That evening, a goat was chosen for the sacrifice. Elder Nyamane led the ceremony, his voice rising and falling in an ancient chant as he poured libations around the well. The village watched in silence, the air so still that even the leaves seemed to hold their breath. As the sacrifice was completed, the strange occurrences stopped. But Wekesa remained changed. He spoke little after that day, and when he did, his words were cryptic. The well sees everything, he would say. It knows your heart. Eventually, he left Nyamane, wandering off into the savannah. Some said he went mad. Others believed he had been marked by the spirits. Years passed, and the memory of that night began to fade until the well called again. One fateful evening, as I sat with the other elders, a young girl named Aching ran into the village square. Her eyes were wide with fear, her breath coming in short gasps. "The well," she cried, "it's glowing." We followed her to the edge of the village, where the mystic well stood. True enough, a faint, otherworldly light emanated from its depths. The water seemed to ripple with an unnatural energy, and the acacia trees swayed as if caught in a wind no one could feel. Elder Nyamane, now frail with age, stepped forward. "The spirits are restless," he said. "The balance has been disturbed once more." This time, the elders decided that someone must journey into the savannah to seek the guidance of the oracle of Oloibin, a seer who lived far beyond the hills. As the youngest elder, the task fell to me, armed with a staff and a pouch of offerings. I set out at dawn, the villagers' hopes resting heavily on my shoulders. The journey was long and treacherous. I crossed dry river beds and dense thickets, guided only by the stars and the whispers of the wind. On the third day, I found the oracle's hut, a modest structure surrounded by carvings of animals and spirits. The oracle, an old man with eyes like burning coals, welcomed me as if he had been expecting me. "The mystic well," he said before I could speak. "Its guardian has been angered." I listened intently as he explained that the well was more than a source of water. It was a link between the physical and spiritual worlds. Its guardian, a spirit of great power, demanded respect and humility from those who approached it. Wekesa's actions had left a scar, and the balance could only be restored by a true act of reverence. The oracle handed me a small, intricately carved figurine of a gazelle. "Place this at the well," he instructed, "and speak the words of unity. Only then will the guardian be appeased." I returned to Nyamane, wary but determined. That night, the entire village gathered at the mystic well. As I placed the figurine at its edge, I felt a surge of energy course through me. I spoke the words the oracle had taught me, my voice steady despite my fear. The light from the well grew brighter, enveloping the village in a warm, golden glow. The water calmed, its surface once again smooth and clear. The acacia trees stood still, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze. The spirits had been appeased. From that day forward, the rules of the mystic well were observed with unwavering respect. The legend of Wekesa and the guardian became a lesson for all, a reminder of the delicate balance between humanity and the unseen forces that shaped our world. And though I am now old, I still visit the well each morning, offering a silent prayer to the guardian that watches over us all.